Mr. Thompson calls the waiter, orders steak and baked potato. He leaves the bone and gristle and he never eats the skin. The busboy comes and takes it, with a cough contaminates it, puts it in a can with coffee grounds and sardine tins. And the truck comes by on Friday and carts it all away. 1,000 trucks just like it are converging on the bay. Oh, garbage, 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 garbage. We're filling up the world with garbage. What will we do when there's no place left to put all the garbage, 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 garbage? Mr. Thompson starts his Cadillac, winds it down the thruway track, leaving friends and neighbors in a hydrocarbon haze. He's joined by lots of smaller cars, all sending gases to the stars, there to form a seething cloud that hangs for 30 days. And the sun licks down into it with an ultraviolet tongue, turns it into smog, then it settles in our lungs. Oh, garbage, 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 garbage. We're filling up the sky with garbage. What will we do when there's nothing left to breathe but garbage, 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 garbage? Getting home and taking off his shoes, he settles with the evening news while the kids do homework with a TV in one ear. While Superman, for the 1000th time, sells talking dolls and conquers crime, dutifully they learn the date of birth of Paul Revere. In the papers there's a piece about the mayor's middle name. He gets it read in time to watch the All-Star Bingo game. Oh, garbage, 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 garbage. We're filling up our minds with garbage. What will we do when there's nothing left to read, and there's nothing left to need, and there's nothing left to watch, and there's nothing left to touch, and there's nothing left to walk upon, and nothing left to talk upon, nothing left to see, and nothing left to be but garbage, 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 garbage.
This is New York City's wastebasket, where 12,000 tons of garbage, a sizable portion of the 26,000 tons of refuse generated every 24 hours, are unloaded daily on behalf of 7 million New Yorkers. Here, the garbage makes the concluding lap of its putrid, dead-end odyssey. Concerned Staten Islanders call this place Mount Trashmore. This monument to our way of life is expected to rise to 550 feet, almost half the height of the World Trade Center towers. It's already the largest landfill in the world and may become the highest land point of the eastern seaboard of the United States. The average American disposes of 5.5 pounds of this stuff every day, as compared to 2.5 pounds daily by our counterparts in the other industrialized countries of the world. In middle-income countries, it's 1.5 pounds a day. In low-income countries, it's 1 pound each day. Our landfills are nearing capacity, and alternative solutions seem years away. How do we get into this mess? This documentary will explore some answers to that question and raise some new questions as well. Where, for example, did this newspaper come from? Why did it wind up here, just one of several million pieces of rubbish? All paper contains cellulose, a substance that nature produces from water and carbon dioxide through the process of photosynthesis, forming an essential part of wood. An indispensable link in the chain of life, a tree is also a marketable commodity, a financially profitable article of commerce. Like the paper made from trees, these tires, too, will probably become part of our highly congested waste stream. Maybe here in Chautauqua County, where a unique ecosystem has been created.
Along with many other kinds of garbage, 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 garbage.
On these 40 greenless acres, 4 million tires have become home to scores of rats and countless disease-carrying insects. Tires piled in large quantities have been known to present a fire hazard of extreme dimensions. Tires burn readily, producing intense heat and massive amounts of sulfurous smoke and gas. This fire involves 7 million scrap tires on a 5-acre tract. $1.3 million of taxpayers' money was expended to contain it. The blaze sent acrid black smoke billowing over 3 states. Our industrialized economy depends not only on transportation. It depends as well on information, and information conveyed on millions of tons of paper every year, the vast majority of it made new. The enormity of the waste disposal problem confronting our society may be measured by the fact that the nation consumed 74 million tons of paper in 1984, more than 3/4 of which will never be reused. Almost 500 pounds of paper per person is discarded annually. As a medium for conveying information, paper takes on a variety of forms.
There you go, Jim.
Morning, Chris.
Morning.
How you doing?
Good.
Yeah, boy.
Some information is valuable for only a brief time, such as meeting announcements carried in a local newspaper. Many such meetings these days seem to focus on the very problem of waste management.
Fight for what should be basic human rights: safe air, clean water. Fight for your children, fight for yourselves, fight for senior citizens, fight for children who are yet unborn, fight for future generations.
These good citizens are among 17 million New Yorkers sharing a major crisis in solid waste management. In many parts of New York State, communities faced with the mandated closure of landfills are debating various alternative methods of garbage disposal. Out of approximately 500 landfills presently operating in the state, about 200 are contaminating drinking water. Some landfills have changed the natural color of our native landscape. Some are leaking as much as 300,000 gallons of leachate yearly. Leachate often contains iron, magnesium, chlorides, and other heavy metals that can cause chronic and acute diseases when humans and other species are exposed to them. Lead, PCBs, and various other toxic substances have been found in numerous wells and creeks near landfills. The federal government ordered the Fountain Avenue landfill to close because seagulls presented a threat to aviation. Mount Trashmore inherits the 9,000 tons of daily garbage. On Long Island, nearly 3 million residents draw their drinking water from the ground. On top of the island's sole source aquifer are located more than a dozen enormous piles of solid waste, much of it laced with toxic or hazardous waste deposited in past years, much of it seeping down into a priceless drinking water reservoir. As mentioned, far too often, landfills not only pose a threat to the health of human beings, but to other forms of life as well. This man has dedicated the greater part of his life to determining the cause of disease and death among species of wildlife.
One of the most problems that I find as a wildlife pathologist for the wild animals of the state are toxic substances that are coming out of our dumps that are distributed around the state. They're all over the place. We've got problems up on the St. Lawrence River, along the Hudson, on Long Island, in all areas. We've got things coming out like PCBs, heavy metals, insecticides. These are moving up through the food chain, and they are killing things like great horned owls They're threatening our bald eagle restoration. They're threatening the peregrine falcons that we're trying to bring back. They make it such that things like mink cannot live in the areas of these dumps. And in some cases, pollutants are moving hundreds of miles down rivers, or like dioxin moving out of dumps around Niagara Falls, making it all the way to the St. Lawrence River several hundred miles away. It's not doomsday yet, but I'm not sure that our society has the resolve to handle its hazardous waste problems, including dumps. And I think if we don't get after this problem, it's our second greatest threat to our survival as a species, the first being nuclear holocaust.
Although nearly 100 landfills in New York State have been ordered to shut down, control of the remaining sites is at best minimal. Moreover, leaders at all levels of government are confronted with the urgent task of safely disposing of some 40,000 tons or more of trash each day at an environmentally acceptable cost to the state's inhabitants. It's easy to understand why we're almost literally choking on our own garbage. Count the plastic bags your family hauls to the trash cans every month. Multiply that by your neighbors on the block, every house in your town or city, each community and county in the state. Remember, too, that most diapers aren't washed anymore, they're thrown away. Fast food, though convenient, likewise clogs the waste stream. Nationally, close to 4 million tons of craft paper bags made the trip from the local grocery store to our homes last year. Although plastic tie bags are now being used in most supermarkets, plastic is not biodegradable. And some scientists believe incinerating certain plastic adds to the dioxin emission problems at waste incineration plants. Additionally, 26 million tons of folding and set-up box material is used each year to dress up gifts, amounting to 221 pounds of garbage for each of the 237.6 million people residing in our nation. How do we rationalize the fact that while millions of people are starving overseas and many Americans go hungry, we collectively throw away 137 million tons of food per year, which represents 20% of all food produced in our country? The more time anyone contemplates solid waste matters, the greater their understanding and sympathy for the hundreds of public servants who are asked every day to take the garbage away, wherever that is. Away, it turns out, is fewer and farther than it used to be. Refuse may now travel 50 or even 100 miles or more from its source to another county. In one noteworthy case, at an extraordinary cost of $64 a ton.
Every community must somehow dispose of its garbage. Questions are how, where, and at what cost. The methods we use include not only landfilling, but source separation for recycling and resource recovery to create energy by combustion. But none of these methods, mind you, totally eliminates the need for landfills. But recycling, combustion, and energy and materials recovery are useful means of reducing the volume and also the hazards of materials to be landfilled. Trouble has been that New York's waste system has placed too much reliance on landfills. We need to foster a more diverse strategy for the future. Let's consider the composition of refuse and just how much can be recycled, recovered, or burned, and how much still needs to be landfilled. The overall refuse stream generally consists of paper, glass, metals, food, plastics, and yard waste. Combustion can eliminate about 75% of the weight of the waste stream, including combustibles and moisture. Much of the remaining 25% of non-combustibles can be processed to recover valuable materials, thus further reducing the fraction which must be landfilled.
The New York State Legislature's response to the solid waste crisis has been to call for the implementation of resource recovery plants, which in lay terms simply means waste-to-energy incinerators. Such plants are under construction by many municipalities and in operation in a few. New York's laws of 1980 and 1983 contain clear articulations of state policy, favoring resource recovery as an alternative to landfilling. And yet, as we look around us at the progress and promise of resource recovery, we see a record of implementation which is halting and uneven at best. This $90 million experiment in resource recovery stands idle, a white elephant earmarked for dismantling and replacement. In 1979, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency tested for polychlorinated dibenzodioxins in the smokestack. The chemical dioxin is a known cancer-causing agent in animals. Test results have prevented the plant from ever operating again. A new contractor has been hired by the town to build a new plant here for an additional $200 million. Published emission tests at New York State's own facility, while reassuring on some points, revealed particulate emission levels up to 10 times the allowable level. Westchester County assisted in the development of what many regard as the current state-of-the-art facility. Nevertheless, the originally permitted levels of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide were increased by 60% when the plant's first test disclosed higher than expected emissions of those substances. These are substances the state has tried to control in order to limit the effects of acid rain. But whatever shortcomings it may or may not have, and all emissions are now being closely monitored, the new Peekskill facility represents, in the opinion of its chief vendor, Signal Resco, the most advanced and efficient refuse combustion boiler in the world.
Mass burn plants are better and safer alternatives than landfill. There are no odors associated with this plant. All the odors are contained within this building, and they're fed by the combustion air system into the furnace, where they are become a product of the combustion. Now, landfills not only emit odors, but they contaminate the groundwater and the surface water. Landfills pollute the atmosphere in far more dangerous ways than merely emitting odors. Moreover, extensive studies have concluded that if operated well, at the right mixture of excess air, the correct distribution of this air, and adequate furnace temperatures, that is above 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, production of dioxins and furans approach zero emissions. All Signal Environmental Systems plants operate well above the temperature range indicated in the studies. So it seems entirely reasonable to conclude that one can be 99.9% assured that no health hazard will result from the emissions from resource recovery facilities. Regarding the dioxin issue, we really don't see it as an issue. However, the EPA has concluded that if dioxins are released from resource recovery plants, they are emitted in such small quantities that they will not be a public health hazard.
Notwithstanding, these findings have been called into serious question by researchers at the Queens College Center for the Biology of Natural Systems.
The claim that we often hear that the dioxin emissions from trash burning incinerators can be controlled by running the incinerator at high temperature or high combustion efficiency is factually incorrect. We have done a series of studies of all of the data from tests of existing incinerators. We find from a strict mathematical analysis that there is no significant correlation between the level of dioxin emissions and either the furnace temperature or combustion efficiency. In fact, we find that most of the incinerators release dioxins at a rate much higher than the rate assumed, for example, by the New York City Department of Sanitation. The result is that the estimates of the increased risk of cancer from the New York City's proposed incinerator are far too low. The Department of Sanitation's HART report concluded that 5.9 additional cases would occur per million over a lifetime of exposure. If a proper rate is introduced into the analysis, this value is over 1,000. And what you need to know is that government agencies have declared that more than 1 to 10 additional cases of cancer per million is unacceptable.
Aware of both the problems and opportunities presented by the resource recovery technology, the New York State Legislature proposed new regulations to control emissions. The rules require certain temperature and time for incineration, as well as monitoring of combustion efficiency, acid gas control, toxic emissions, and sampling of ash residues.
The scientific debate over these issues is by no means settled. There are those who continue to advocate good combustion, and others who, like Dr. Commoner, say that combustion factors alone are not related to emissions. Another growing school of thought says that good acid gas and particulate controls will also limit dioxins and other toxic emissions. Whatever the outcome of the scientific debate, the legislation approved by the Senate and Assembly and signed by the governor will give the state the tools necessary to properly regulate this technology.
In addition to reducing the volume of waste, these plants also generate electricity, which is sold to local utilities. Thus, waste is converted into energy, and some measure of the energy used to create all these products is thereby recovered for the economy's future use. Other forms of recycling do not involve the burning of trash. Some communities have a different story to tell. Here, a successful program of source separation exists. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, it's the biggest such project in the country. An estimated 35 to 45% of Ice Slip's residents separate 10% of the town's waste stream. Each ton disposed at this source separation center means that that ton of waste doesn't need to be landfilled or sent to a burn plant. Ice Slip Town takes in an estimated $300,000 per year recycling newspaper alone, as opposed to, say, $180,000 per year that it would cost to dump that much waste into an incinerator. That's a net saving of almost $500,000. A number of paper manufacturers have adapted their processes to utilize used paper to make new paper. The world's largest recycler of newspaper into newsprint buys all of Islip's recycled newspapers.
Last year, the Garfield mill consumed more than 250,000 tons of old newspapers, which were recycled into some 210,000 tons of newsprint. We obtain our fiber raw material from various sources, including volunteer groups and municipal collections such as Islip's. Trucks dump the loads of newspapers onto conveyors, which move the paper to two large pulpers. In the pulpers, rollers mix the paper with warm water and de-inking chemicals, breaking it down into a fiber pulp. The wet pulp is laid on the main screen of the paper machine. Coming off the paper machine, the newsprint is wound onto a composition core and slit into sizes suitable for the particular needs of our customers, such as the Newark Star-Ledger, Newsday, and the New York Times. In the nearly 25 years in which we have been recycling newspapers, we have utilized more than 5 million tons of material which otherwise would have entered the solid waste stream and been landfilled. Islip benefits from our recycling process by reducing solid waste disposal costs, and we benefit by having Islip as a reliable, cost-effective fiber supply. In addition, the United States foreign trade balance of payments is enhanced because our newspaper publisher customers can secure their newsprint supply from a U.S. rather than foreign source.
The success of efforts like Islip's depends on the availability of markets like Garden State paper. Source separation of refuse only makes sense after we have secured the necessary expansion of markets for the recycled material. Scrap paper is also exported for remanufacture overseas. Having delivered their initial cargo, freighters go back to foreign ports loaded with tons of scrap paper as ballast. In fact, scrap paper and scrap metal represent the largest volume exports from the Port of New York. The world's ever-growing demand for paper and paper products is limited by the availability and cost of new pulpwood from trees. Recycling our used paper conserves natural resources thousands of miles away. Use of recycled fibers rather than virgin pulp and paper making also results in 60 to 70% energy savings. Likewise, as we recycle copper, lead, or zinc scrap, we assure future supplies for America's industrial growth, since we are so dependent on overseas sources for many of these basic metals. It requires 2 to 3 times more energy to manufacture a steel product with virgin ore than it does from recycled scrap.
This newspaper recycling program, initiated by 4-H clubs, has proven to be quite successful. The clubs sell the paper to local farmers for cattle bedding. In 1983, New York State took a major step toward reducing litter and solid waste by requiring all beer and soft drink containers to carry a deposit.
As the prime sponsor of the bottle bill, as it was known in the state legislature, I'm really very pleased with the results of the law. Now that we have almost 2 years of experience with this law, I think we see that it's really accomplishing all the objectives that we wanted it to. The prime objective, of course, was to reduce litter, reduce the number of bottles and cans on the streets, in the parks, on the sidewalks, on the beaches, and it's done that. In addition, it substantially reduced the solid waste problem. The costs of collecting and disposing of solid waste to towns, cities, and villages around New York has been reduced. And the bill, even though it means a little bit of inconvenience for consumers, is overwhelmingly accepted by New York citizens. My own survey showed that over 80% of my constituents favor the law, and the recent report of the Temporary Commission on Returnable Containers showed that 2/3 of New Yorkers statewide support the bottle bill. So that the fight that we fought for 10 years has proved to be worthwhile. We've reduced solid waste, we've encouraged recycling, and in fact I think we've convinced the people of New York that it makes sense to conserve the resources of this planet and not to throw everything away and start all over again.
The bottle law has had a significant impact on the supply and price of aluminum, plastic, and glass.
They were paying me 57 cents a pound for the aluminum, and they were paying me $55 a ton for glass, and also about $65 for cardboard. But today the prices have declined terribly, and I guess when an overabundance is around, somebody has to suffer, and the guy that's selling is going to have to suffer because the buyer doesn't need you anymore. Well, we've found a way to get rid of some of our plastics, but now that has gone because the fellow who used to buy our plastics don't want it anymore. We were shredding the plastics, and we thought we would get some money for that. We were getting between 7 and 10 cents a pound. Now the market for that is gone because I understand it's easier for them to use virgin material than to recycle plastic. We have many problems with our pallets that the glass comes on. These pallets are disposable. It costs money to get rid of all these, and was never figured into the cost of the bottle bill. Nobody realized the added costs that we had when the bottle bill did come aboard.
Even as communities throughout the state explore ways to resolve their solid waste disposal problems, somebody still has to pick up the garbage day by day.
people were sick and tired of being called garbage man. They hated it. They were sick and tired of feeling that they were part of the garbage, that they were mules, cockroaches. These are words that I heard people use about themselves. That people's families didn't want to say that the breadwinner, the person that made it possible for the kids to go to college, worked in sanitation. That they didn't feel the kind of support that you need to be out in the streets when it's raining and you can't hide from the weather and you still keep picking up the garbage. You take everything to make the city alive. I heard so many hundreds of stories that I finally decided to do a simple thing, and that is to face each person and say face to face, as if there were no mass communications, and say thank you for keeping New York City alive, because that's exactly what these people, they're not invisible. They make the city alive. As an artist, I wanted to show that. I also had the great pleasure to push this notion of work as art much further, and that was to create a ballet with 6 mechanical sweepers down 32 blocks of Madison Avenue. This was a futurist ballet that was done in September 1983, and I just did another one in Rotterdam in Holland with 10 garbage trucks to show that, or to really ask a question in public, what's the relationship between the highest culture and the most basic work in the whole world?
Just carrying this can, right? Right. All this unknown liquid coming out of there. You don't know what it is.
You bet.
Comes out, gets all over your clothes, like my pants, my shoes.
It's a hell of a job out here to do this. It's a hell of a job. Nobody wants to do the job. Nobody wants to do the job. But everybody complains about our job.
I will not go in my house and touch my kid, because I'm always scared I'm going to carry something home.
Of course, this country's garbage plight is in no way a recent development. It has a long and fascinating history.
Many other kinds of garbage, 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 garbage.
Before 1854, many Albany, New York residents disposed of their garbage by throwing it in the street, where it was eaten by free-running pigs. Eventually, the city put a stop to the practice by rounding up 15,000 pigs. Near the end of the 19th century, more sophisticated methods of coping with the refuse problem were on the minds of various inventors. Let's cremate the waste, they proposed. In 1879, Henry R. Foote of Stamford, Connecticut, was issued a U.S. patent for his furnace for cremating garbage. The first U.S. incinerator was established on this island off Manhattan shoreline in 1885. It was located on a U.S. Army base. A patent was granted in 1894 to Malin Fulton of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for a smoke-consuming furnace, described by the inventor as a method and means for consuming the escaping gaseous products of combustion in furnaces. Historians, however, have not been able to establish if such devices ever made it past the concept and patent stage.
Throughout the decades since the Industrial Revolution, cities in New York have fought a continuing battle against the rising tide of solid waste. New York City has had to confront this problem on a vast scale for years.
The solid waste blues, it's really bad news. I slog through the ooze in my old rambling shoes. Oh, I've got those solid waste blues. The blues I can't lose, and if I could choose, yeah, this trash I'd reuse. I've got the solid waste blues, all the living things lose. The rams and the ewes yearn for green growing views. if I could choose. Yeah, this trash I'd reuse. Yes, I've got those solid waste blues. The blues I can't lose, and if I could choose, you bet your sweet future this trash I'd reuse. I'd reuse.
The early generation of incinerators was developed first in New York, but as the number of these incinerators increased, they were met with increased concerns about air pollution, or smoke, as it was called at that time. Responding to this concern, the city began dumping its waste at sea, but the state was sued by the state of New Jersey, and the practice was stopped by the mid-1930s. A second generation of incinerators was then developed, and they were installed all across the city. But by the early 60s, new concerns about air pollution began to force their closure also. The city's only recourse at that point was to landfill the waste, but it soon discovered that the landfills were filling up. Then, the State Department of Environmental Conservation discovered that the city's landfills were violating a whole host of environmental laws. They were polluting wetlands and groundwater. They were illegally receiving hazardous waste and other materials. As a result, we have ordered the city to close its landfills. Largely in response to these environmental actions by the state, the city has developed plans for the construction of 5 waste-to-energy plants to be strategically located throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City. The first of these, proposed to be built at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, is designed to convert up to 3,000 tons of trash each day into usable steam energy. The state is helping the city's resource recovery efforts by providing $46 million in funds from the State Environmental Quality Bond Act. Therefore, we believe that in the long run, vigorous enforcement of our environmental laws and regulations is really the best way to encourage our municipalities all across New York State to develop improved methods for handling solid waste.
During the 1970s, concern about past waste disposal practices and the discovery of contaminated drinking water on Long Island not only accelerated the search for viable alternatives, but underscored the need for remedial action. In 1983, the New York State Legislature ordered nearly all Long Island landfills to cease operating by 1990. While resource recovery can accommodate some of these communities' waste disposal needs, not all waste can be burned. And the residue from waste that is burned may also require landfilling. Therefore, increased attention is being given by the state legislature to methods of reducing and recycling as much garbage as possible, to minimize what has to be buried and/or burned.
There's no question we will be fighting a losing battle unless we can reduce the overall amount of waste generated in the first place. In order to help the legislature discover new ways of reducing and recycling waste, the Commission sponsored a 3-day conference on the subject. Our meetings attracted more than 300 experts from over 20 states and 4 foreign countries, and convinced us, above all, that for recycling to work, markets must be developed and sustained, subsidies for landfilling must be eliminated, and natural resources must be conserved.
Recycled paper sold by Conservatory to the state of New York during this time amounted to 8 million pounds. There was an average recycled content of this paper of 50%, which turns out to a net recycled content of 4 million pounds of paper. The numbers we've used to put together the environmental savings come from EPA. They also come from utilities. The electricity saved is from that one. The number of trees saved by New York State's purchase of recycled paper from Conservatory was 34,000 trees. Energy, 8,420 kilowatt hours. And if you want to understand that for real, That means the amount of electricity to heat and cool 1,040 homes. Water saved, because it takes less water to make recycled paper than it does virgin paper, 14 million gallons. Air pollution, 580 tons less air pollution into our environment. Solid waste, waste that would have gone to landfill, 1,100 tons. And if you convert that at about $60 a ton in New York State for tipping fees and going to landfill, that comes out to $66,000.
There's a misconception that where we are now as a society, as an economy, is inevitably where we had to be. And if you read some of those books, you'll find out that that's not the case. And the second thought, which is all too pervasive, is that where we are heading is a direction that's inevitable. In fact, I will now talk about the planning profession. Again, don't take this personally, but in general, the planning profession looks at where we are and extrapolates from where we are, and then lays out all the numbers and all everything that has to happen so that the city or county can meet that extrapolated projection. The point being, if you want to look to the future, find out where you want to be and then plan to get where you want to be. Just don't make extrapolations. And the technologies and the science, the literal science of recycling that has been developed, codified, reported on dozens of times by these recycling coordinators, which I've mentioned, it's quite clear that we now know how to recycle. It's quite clear we know how to get people to recycle. And on the end-use end, it's quite clear that the manufacturing base and the technology is known to bring in the plants to use these end materials.
Market development clearly is not an afterthought. It's the very necessary companion to source separation programs. We need to develop a new and enduring demand for recycled products so that we can absorb some of the inflexible supplies the governments are planning to collect. The private salvage industry has always expanded and contracted its collection network according to market demand. Government recycling programs simply don't have that kind of flexibility. They can't afford to return source-separated materials to their landfills. It's a very expensive way to gather your garbage. They also can't afford to make changes in their public education programs. Once you've taught your citizens to source separate, you can't let them see you throw the newspaper into the garbage truck. They'll never play with you again.
Essentially, the federal tax system provides benefits for the exploitation of virgin materials. Thus, recycled materials are made to look artificially expensive. Many municipalities allow the use of their landfills to be free or almost so. Again, recycling is made to look relatively costly. Finally, markets for recyclables are unstable, and government involvement may be necessary in order to stabilize and sustain them.
Diversity is clearly a key element in our ongoing efforts to resolve the solid waste disposal crisis. We do not as yet entirely agree on the exact amount of incineration, landfilling, and recycling. We do see eye to eye on the need for integrating all three: controlling environmental risks, comprehensive planning, and the broadest possible public input. With so many qualified and concerned people working on solid waste management, our ability to attain these goals is certain to increase. You might say that right now we're on the flat part of a learning curve. As we strive to surmount our common problems, let us remember how a straight line is known to curve back on itself, forming a circle. Like the process of recycling itself, so too is society's waste part of a cycle of exploitation, manufacture, consumption, and disposal. Our choice is between a cycle which serves our long-term need for a clean environment and a stable economy, or one which turns on us in the form of polluted air and groundwater. What kind of a cycle will we choose? Far to the north, where the mighty St. Lawrence River separates New York State from Canada, there are many Native Americans who believe humankind has stepped outside the sacred circle of life. We should listen well to these first Americans. Draw as best we can upon their rich legacy of reverence for the earth, the water, the sky, and all its diverse creatures. That's really what we should be all about.
We are gathered here this morning thankful for another day, thankful that life continues in its natural cycle, especially thankful to our Mother the Earth and all her presence of creation, thankful to our animal brothers and sisters and to all the bird life who sing to us their beautiful songs, thankful to the waters that continue to flow in their natural directions and including all the aquatic forms of life. We are gathered together today around this tree so that the planting of this tree will remind us through its symbolism of our desire for world peace and hope for the continued existence of humanity. The tree of peace is a symbol understood by many families in the world through its similarities of instruction. May this tree grow tall and strong and spread its branches to protect the earth dwellers. May the rays of hope filter through its branches and touch every life form. May we always remember the dream of the peacemaker, a world without war, might one day come true. And lastly, may we direct our thoughts towards our grandchildren in the 7th generation, that they too may enjoy a clean and safe environment.
I've run through open fields, walked on million-dollar roads. Oh, I've smelled the night fires burning, felt that north wind's bitter cold. Now I face the dawn and pray for my grandchildren's day. May stories that I tell them, may they never sound this way. Children, it's true, the sky once was blue. Trees grew tall and these mountains were my home. The wind did sing on eagle's wings and the buffalo did roam. Why think about the future when there's money to be made? Weapons to build and war games to be played. All those greedy politicians, their decisions I despise. I'd like to lose them in the mountains till the truth shows in their eyes. Children, it's true, the sky once was blue. Trees grew tall and these mountains were my home. The wind did sing on eagle's wings, the buffalo did roam. There's an old Indian man in the mountains, he is brother to the birds. The bears trust his smell, the truth lives inside his words. And he speaks with saddened anger of the poison in the rain, and of people who use the earth for their own selfish gain. Children, it's true, the sky once was blue. Trees grew tall and these mountains were my home. The wind did sing on eagle's wings, the buffalo did roam. So children, may I never have to tell